everybody. This is Chris.
And Cathy.
We wanted to take a minute to thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate every listener and are grateful for this platform.
Please help us share our vision by subscribing to our show through your favorite streaming app. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at PetAbility Podcast.
Check out our ever-growing list of affiliates and sponsors. Simply go to the show notes for information and links.
And be sure to use our promo code PETPOD22, that's PETPOD22, on checkout to receive your discount from our affiliates. And now, here's a word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Alon Landa, CEO of MedcoVet, and I'm a proud sponsor of PetAbility. We decided to partner with Chris and Cathy because, like them, we want to empower all pet owners who are trying to do the most for their pets. At MedcoVet, we specialize in advanced home laser therapy for pets. Laser therapy is a safe and effective treatment for common conditions like arthritis and wounds, and it relieves pain for most conditions caused by inflammation. With MedcoVet, pet owners can perform this treatment at home while receiving support from experienced clinicians. If you think your pet would benefit from healing at home, visit medcovet.com, and one of our clinical experts will work with you to determine if home laser therapy is the right fit for you and your pet. Tell them PetAbility sent you.
We're going to be focusing on Brachycephalic Obstructive Airway syndrome. There are particular features associated with that.
Welcome to PetAbility. I'm your host, Cathy Simon, certified veterinary technician and certified canine rehabilitation practitioner.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston, licensed physical therapist and small animal physical rehabilitationist.
Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives.
Good afternoon, my friend. How are you, Cathy?
Good afternoon, Chris. I am riding high today.
Yes, please share with our audience your wonderful news. I'm so proud of you.
Yes. I, as the audience may or may not know, I've been working really hard on obtaining my certification in hospice and palliative care for animals. And the coursework has been intense, and I finished all that, and the workshops were fantastic. And then there was a case study to be done, and I passed the case study with a 90% out of 100. So I'm pretty proud of that. It was a lot of work. Yeah, it was a lot of work. I learned a lot about myself and how I handle patients in their end of life care. And that paper just drove it home for me about things that I could do better or different or needs of the clients or patients. And I only have one last step, and that's the exam in August. So fingers crossed, and maybe toes too. Okay.
Paws crossed, right?
Paws crossed, please. Yeah.
Well, I know you got this, and you are super smart, and you're very dedicated to always enhancing your career through education. And that makes me very proud. I don't think I could be friends with you if you were just, like some slacker. And, 90%, my only question is, why not 100%, Cathy? What's wrong with you?
Oh, I know. I mean, I suppose I could appeal that, but you know what? I'm afraid if I appeal, they'll knock it down to like 75.
And you told me too, this paper was not slouch. It was like 19 pages long. And
it had to be at least 10 to 12 pages long. Mine ended up being about 17, 18 pages long. Poor person who was assigned this job to read all these papers. But it was no small task. It was no small task. Yeah.
And if there's nothing else about you, we all know that you are verbose. And I am too, so I can call you that. I say, as a term of endearment. Of course.
I am. And you know what? I'm going to take this opportunity to thank the family that let me write about their dog, this wonderful dog, Abby. And her family was just amazing. And we nicknamed her Tall Abby because she was a very tall lab. And she was just the heart of this family, and her people were wonderful, and they took great care of her. So I thank them for letting me write about their dog and her care.
Can I do a little jibber jabber to piggyback on that? Not that there's any segue at all. We're recording here in the heat of summer, and I am on a women's golf league, and I played for the third time on Tuesday. And there are 2 golf course dogs at this club that I go to. And these 2 are owned again by 2 people that are associated with the club. And Ronnie was telling me, who owns Jack's, that the life of a golf course dog is about 2 to 3 years shorter than the average lifespan of a similar dog that doesn't hang out on a golf course.
Why's that?
Exactly. I was like, what? It's the chemicals.
Oh, of course.
So he said that like whenever they spray, they do not let Jax or Callie, as the other dog that belongs to someone else, go on the course. They wash their feet when they come in, all that. Don't let them drink, the water and things that are, but I never thought of that. It was a real aha moment for me. So I just wanted to share that with our audience, to keep that in mind. And even like your own lawn chemicals and things in your yard that you may be using, make sure that they're pet safe. And when you go to a golf course or something similar and there's a dog there, thank them for their service, because oftentimes they're doing a job such as patrolling to keep geese and other unwanted animals, from the course so that they don't get hurt, first and foremost. They do have a function. And of course, as dogs do anywhere, they bring a smile to our faces when we're greeted by them when we show up. But boy, was it hot on Tuesday. I suffered, but
I know. And you know what? This segues a little bit into what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking today about brachycephalic dogs. And, you and I had talked about doing a show on that because of a couple reasons. One, Mac is going to be evaluated by a surgeon in about a month because he's starting to show signs of brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome. And so we're going to have him evaluated. And we see a lot of these dogs in rehab for various reasons. And so I thought we thought this would be a great topic to talk about, how rehab plays or the things that you should be concerned about when you're rehabbing dogs that are brachycephalic.
Yes. And let's remind our audience, because they may not be familiar, who Mac is. So
Mac is, and I have an award to prove it. Mac is the world's smartest pug. He's my pug, of course.
Did you order that on Amazon?
No, I got it from our friend, a mutual friend of ours. She gave me an award as the smartest pug. And he has 2 trainers that can confirm that he's the smartest pug that they've ever seen. And remember, he's a titled nose work dog. Yes. So he's a really smart dog. So he's my man. And, he's almost 7 and he's been showing a little bit more of heat intolerance and a little bit of exercise intolerance. So we're going to get him checked and see what we can do best for him to make sure that he continues to do all the things that he loves to do and not be at risk.
So let's tie these kind of loose ends together. So it's hot out. Right. We're recording in June, end of June. You have a pug and you're talking about heat intolerance and different things and possible surgery because he's brachycephalic. So what the heck is that? What does that mean?
So these dogs that are brachycephalic are categorized by these shortened skull shapes, which gives them sort of this distinctive appearance with a pushed in face and a short nose. And Chris, you'll love this because I know that you love where words come from because it's one of your favorite things. That brachycephalic comes from the Greek word brachy, which means short, and cephalic, which means head. So it's a dog with a short, squishy, flat face head.
And to be contrasted, there's a couple of other skull types.
Right.
Yeah, one is mesocephalic.
Yeah, those are typically your like Labrador retrievers, your golden retrievers, your German shepherds.
And then there's a third one called dolichocephalic.
And those are your sighthounds typically. Those are your greyhounds, your Afghan hounds, the borzois, the whippets. Those are categorized by sort of this long and narrow head with a long nasal cavity and jaw. Their eye set is a little bit different too, because these dogs are hunters. They rely a lot on their peripheral vision. And so you'll see their eye set is a little bit more to the side than in the front of the face, like some of our other dogs. That's what makes them superior hunters.
What typically makes the brachycephalic dog's eyes special is that they tend to be more front and center and a little bit bulging. And I've heard that people can humanize the brachycephalic dog's faces a little bit more. And they're particularly expressive through their eyes and things. So we find them very, very endearing. And for that reason, the brachycephalic breeds are becoming more and more and more common as pets across the globe, not just in the US, but across the globe. Very, very popular.
Some of these brachycephalic breeds include, the English and the French bulldogs, the pugs, the Boston terriers, the Shih Tzus, Pekingese, I love Pekingese, boxers, and the Lhasa Apsos. And you know what? We've actually had a really long history with the brachycephalic dogs. There are early depictions of brachycephalic dogs that could be found in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamian artifacts. And that kind of suggests that these dogs have been around for thousands of years, and they were portrayed as loyal companions and guardians. And they became very popular in China as well. So the Pekingese, the Shih Tzus, and the pugs are highly prized by royalty. And then you would also see them become more popular in Europe. The popularity of the brachycephalic dogs spread to Europe through that, trade and exploration. And English bulldogs originate obviously from England, and they were bred for bull baiting. But over time, that shifted focus from their working abilities to their appearance and their companionship qualities. We've developed various brachycephalic breeds based off of the English bulldog.
It's very interesting because when you look historically, which by the way, I'm just thrilled already this early into this podcast, because first of all, we're using lots of big words with many syllables.
Yes, we are.
Polysyllabic. Yes. And secondly, we've talked about some statistics and some history and
this is your show.
This is just up my alley. Thank you, Cathy, for indulging me.
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
But what I want to say, and I think in the English bulldog in particular, the appearance has morphed rather quickly from their historical function. And now we're kind of getting back to the old English bulldog, which means how they looked back in the day.
Originally. Yeah, exactly.
So they were taller. They did have a longer snout or muzzle and many other things. So, I always think we need to be very, very cautious when because sometimes we can, inadvertently cause things that aren't necessarily desirable.
There's been a movement most recently to stop the continued breeding of brachycephalic dogs or go back to the original form of these dogs, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But remember, there are some brachycephalic dogs that are in, by no fault of their own, the shelters and rescue, and those dogs still need homes. But I think we can do better. I think as human beings, we made this happen. We picked a deformity and called it fun. And it's not, because there's a lot of medical concerns that go along with this type of head and skull shape. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that, Chris.
I think that the French bulldogs have become particularly sought after in America very recently, and they are adorable. And we do think many times that, when they snore, that's so cute. But we hope to enlighten you as to what this may mean, right? In terms of their health and things like that. But I did read that French bulldogs are 17 times more likely to go into respiratory distress or have a heat stroke than any other breed.
I would agree with that. And I would also add that I read an article not that long ago about the 5 most medically expensive breeds that was written by one of these insurance companies. And Frenchies made the top 5. Because of their medical history and their medical problems. So I do love the Frenchie, though. I can't lie. I do love them. But again, I think this is an area where as humans, we could do better,
To the Frenchie owners out there, again, I get it. And
I do too.
The point of our show is to educate and, help you to have a long and healthy and happy life with your Frenchie or any other brachycephalic breed out there. So listen on.
And so let's talk a little bit about the anatomical features compared to other breeds. So let's dive into that a little bit.
We're going to be focusing on Brachycephalic Obstructive Airway Syndrome. And as you said, Cathy, there are particular features associated with that. So the first one, that's that shortened skull or nose or muzzle, right? Whatever you want to call it, compared to the mesocephalic or the dolichocephalic, they're smushed. What does that do? That results in not only a compressed face, but particularly compressed nasal passage.
Their mouth is short, it's small and crowded, and their palate is often wider and shorter, which can also contribute to breathing difficulties.
So there's, how I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is because it's all smushed up, that tissue has nowhere to go. So it just kind of sags and there's excess. And particularly, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but particularly the soft palate.
So dogs have these little rolled up bones in the nose called turbinates. And what turbinates do is they help to warm and moisten the air as the dog breathes. So that helps the dog to retain heat and water when it exhales. But also they cool the air for the dog. And if those turbinates are crowded, that can also be a contributing factor to Brachycephalic Obstructive Airway syndrome, because those turbinates are packed in there and they're not doing their job appropriately. They can't cool the air appropriately.
Right, Cathy. So I think it's important for our audience to know that the function of the nose in dogs is not just for smelling and breathing, which is obvious, right? But vital to thermoregulation.
Right.
So the dog's nose is very specialized to dissipate heat through, and what my research showed was something called the nasal conchae, which are covered with large vascularized mucous membranes, which cool the air by evaporation during inspiration. So when they're hot and the air flows over these mucous membranes, it gets cooled. So it helps to keep them cooler. And you mentioned like warming the air and keeping it moist, which is vital for thermal regulation, I'm sure, in cold temperatures in the winter months. So it's very, very specialized and important. And when we go messing with that by smushing up their noses, you can see how that would cause problems.
The stenotic nares, which, is a narrowing of the nostrils, and that restricts airflow.
Yes. But what I learned in my research is that you can't just assume if you can see that your dog's nares are nice and round and seemingly open, that there's not a problem, because there is actually a large inner wing of nasal cartilage that also can restrict airflow.
Right.
So you simply cannot use external visualization. It needs to be evaluated more internally by a veterinary team. And then also mention the elongated soft palate. So as I alluded to before, when you squish up the nose, all this excess tissue is left kind of hanging there. And that can cause obstruction. But a lot of times people don't even know like hard palate, soft palate, what that means. But when you think about it, the hard palate is what we commonly refer to as the roof of our mouth, right?
Right.
And the soft palate is that tissue behind. So where that hard palate ends and is more retro or further back toward your throat area is the soft palate. And I think a lot of times we don't even think about that, give it consideration. But certainly I've noticed, as I now have sleep apnea, have to wear a CPAP, that I feel like there's like I gag more and I choke more when I'm eating, and I feel like there's just extra stuff. So maybe some of you can relate to that as well in yourself.
Yeah. And I think you can sometimes hear it too, like in these, I'm going to make the noise. Okay. When you hear these pugs or some of these peaks and they're like, that is definitely one of the signs that you should get that checked for you. Did I make the sound appropriately?
Well, do it again, because it was very short. That was my version.
And that snorting should, is an indication that we should, talk to the veterinarian about, do we have some elongating of the soft palate, and is that causing partial obstruction?
And there's two things under our list of distinguishing anatomical features that I never really heard of before. And the first is hypoplastic trachea. And the trachea is the windpipe, and it becomes smaller in diameter than normal. So that's a no-brainer, right? If the air in and out from your lungs is smaller, then that's going to cause problems.
And the tissue inside the larynx can also become sort of turned outward, and that can also obstruct airflow.
And that's called everted laryngeal saccules.
All of these anatomical features are major contributing factors to brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome.
That is so cumbersome. So maybe we should just call it BOAS.
Okay. Can we say Boaz?
Is it, is it pronounced? Do people say that? Boaz?
I've never said Boaz. I just said it for the first time here.
I think we should just say BOAS.
Okay. You got it. Okay.
Nobody can have issue with that. We're just saying the letters. All right. Earlier when we were talking about the architecture changes in these breeds, there's something in particular during growth where, again, the turbinate becomes large, it restricts airflow. Then these dogs must generate a very large pressure change during inhalation and exhalation, which can cause this laryngeal collapse. And one study found that pups as young as 6 months had a collapsed larynx. And then it becomes a vicious cycle, right? Because if their larynx is collapsing, then it's even more effortful and more pressure needs to be generated. And then things become more swollen and collapse and sag. And so it just typically gets worse over time. And it's not to say, I just don't want people to think again, oh, my puppy's only 4 months old or, 7 months old. And so they're too young to be having these problems. Noting some of these signs that we're going to be talking about, no matter what the age, because one thing I remember I asked you when you told me that Mac had a little episode, which caused you to explore further what you may need to do to correct it or prevent it in the future. And I'm like, but I thought, Mac is such a good looking pug, and his nose is a little bit longer compared to other pugs, and his nares look good compared to other pugs. When you adopted him, that was the case. And I didn't realize that these things can change over time. And I was, again, doing some research online, and it would show like pictures of progression of actually the nostrils closing. Like they can start very patent and then become smaller over time, which I had no clue about. So again, if you're like, oh, my dog's 10 and he's never had problems, so it can't be that. Well, it can. Or my dog's a puppy, it can't have problems. Well, it can.
It could.
So
it could.
Please.
What you'll notice about Mac too is his mouth is very, very small and very crowded, and his tongue sticks out because it just doesn't fit in there. And although he's very cute when he sticks his little tongue out, it's certainly not anatomically correct.
That is such a good point, because that's one of his trademark qualities is his little tongue. So freaking cute. But I did not realize it's because he doesn't have room for his tongue in his mouth.
It doesn't fit.
Oh my gosh. See, I'm learning something all the time.
I know. Mac's teaching us.
Yeah. Let's elaborate on the issues and problems that can develop as a result of being a brachycephalic breed. Rather quickly, we discussed the restricted airflow. And that can be from the stenotic nares, the elongated soft palate, and other issues that make it harder to breathe. And then there is increased risk of airway obstruction. So again, the elongated soft palate can partially block the entrance to the trachea or windpipe, and especially during exercise or excitement. So these may be triggers. And I have a personal story about this.
Oh, do tell.
So, yes, as you know, I have Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, and being the, diligent rather than paranoid mom that I am, at age 2.5, I brought them to their first cardiology appointment because all Cavaliers will get mitral valve disease or heart disease. And so I told the cardiologist that Julep, the female of my twins, would do this weird reverse sneezing. And so she's like, that's interesting and so forth. And this was, I think during COVID time. So she brought Julep into the hospital and did her exam, and she had her echo and all of that. And then when she brought her out, she's like, you are so right. When I was bringing her back out of the hospital to return to you in the car, she started with the reverse sneezing. Then I noticed it would become more prolonged to the point that she's actually turning blue.
Oh,
yes. And it's harder for me to break her out of it. I used to be able to just, tickle her throat, right? And, blow in her face. And then, I kind of stick my finger maybe in her cheek. And the point is to make her swallow. Now I have to literally close her nose so that she is forced to swallow, so that I think it's her palate is in the way and she can't breathe. And so she's, it's terrifying. And I have to tell any dog sitter or person that she's with for a while, but it's becoming more and more of a problem and harder to reverse. So that's my little story about airway obstruction.
Yes, scary. These dogs also have a significant heat intolerance. We talked about this, a few minutes ago, about dogs primarily cooling themselves by panting. And these brachycephalic dogs, due to their compromised airways, have difficulty panting effectively, making them more prone to overheating and heat stroke. And let me tell you, it can happen fast. And as a technician, I would say that I see probably, I haven't practiced in a while, but when I was practicing, 3 or 4 heat stroke cases every summer. And some of these dogs didn't make it. So it can happen very quickly for these dogs.
And I think this is especially important for, trainers and daycares and dog sitters and dog walkers to be aware of when they're, in charge of these dogs, during the warmer months and things. I had a very good friend who worked at a very prominent, well-known and well-reputed training center in the Boston area. And they would often take dogs that they train for overnights or weekends when their clients were traveling. And she brought a group to a beach and they were all having a grand old time. And then suddenly one of them went down and could not be revived, with knowing first aid, CPR, all of that sort of thing. And they said it was probably a heat stroke type of incident.
Yeah. It can happen faster than you might think. It can happen very quickly.
And so don't hesitate to get to your nearest.
Do not hesitate. Exactly.
ER center and so forth, because it can be a matter of life and death. Don't try to necessarily cool them down on your own. Of course, take those measures in the meantime as you're transporting them.
And then, of course, we talked about this already, the turbinates, being their inability to do their job because they're so crowded and they're packed in there. And so they're not doing their job effectively. And it all contributes to that heat intolerance and the possible heat stroke.
Ultimately, if they can't breathe effectively, then they have lowered oxygen intake. And we know oxygen is vital to survival, right?
Sure is. That is biology 101.
So we need oxygen in our blood to, support all of our organ functions and our brain function and all of that. So, this cumulative effect of narrowed airways, the elongated soft palate, and other anatomical features ultimately results in less efficient oxygen intake, which then can lead to chronic fatigue, exercise intolerance, and in severe cases, cyanosis, which is, as I mentioned with julep, that bluish tint to the skin or mucous membranes due to lack of oxygen. So, they're covered in fur, so it's hard to see if they're turning blue, externally, but I can definitely see that as I'm trying to get her to effectively take in oxygen, that her mouth mucous membranes are becoming pale white and then kind of a bluish hue at their worst.
Yeah. And, when I think about, way back in the day when I was in technician school, I mean, we're talking way back, but when they teach you about these animals that something happens, they collapse for whatever reason, maybe heat stroke, maybe from illness, maybe from a trauma, ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation, everything else follows after that.
Good point. That's great. ABCs. Good to remember.
Yep.
Cathy, we can talk about the chronic respiratory stress. So, again, as alluded to, these little brachycephalic breeds are constantly working so hard to just breathe, and that can lead to inflammation. And one of the signs of inflammation is swelling. And if their airways swell, then they're further exacerbating their breathing problems. So as I talked about earlier, a vicious cycle. And I'm sorry if we're being repetitive, but this is worth repeating, I think, because it's very, very important for you, our audience, to understand exactly what's going on and the sequelae or consequences of some of the signs that you may see. Again, the noisy breathing and that sort of thing, and don't minimize it. So again, over time, with all of these issues happening, it can lead to some secondary conditions. We talked about laryngeal collapse, but also a correlation with heart issues because the heart has to work harder. There can be secondary gastrointestinal issues, which again, my Cavaliers have. So I'm thinking a lot of this heart, breathing, GI stuff is all correlated in some way. In fact, Baxter, and you know this, Cathy, because I called you in a panic. Baxter was suddenly like not breathing well and coughing, and he, we think, regurgitated his food and it went into his lungs and caused aspiration pneumonia. And we had to monitor him for gastric reflux for a while to make sure this wasn't a repeated event, in which case he would have had to be medicated and so forth. But these breeds, I think, are more susceptible to regurgitation, which simply means that they're basically bringing their food back up into their mouth, and then they can breathe in and suck that down, whether it's food or water, and it goes into their lungs, and then ultimately that's aspiration, and then can cause pneumonia from that. So
Yeah. You'll see it a lot on, we see it a lot on these brachycephalic dogs radiographically where they've aspirated, and usually it kind of goes to like right middle lung lobe. So they are at higher risk for it. And I'm glad that you called me, because I think we determined, hey, this sounds like maybe he aspirated. Let's go to the emergency room right away.
Yes.
And so that's something that if you think that your dog may have aspirated, then you definitely want to talk to your veterinarian about that.
And one other thing that I thought was really interesting too is, back to Frenchies again. Sorry, Frenchie owners, but they commonly have a hiatal hernia. So what I understand is that's when part of the stomach actually herniates back up into the esophagus, causing gastric reflux, right? So when they're regurgitating, they're having gastric reflux, and the acid and all this is going into their esophagus. That can result in a hiatal hernia. And so there's thought that this increased effort of breathing actually may promote the hernia occurring. So I thought that was fascinating too, these breed correlations.
All right, so let's talk about the considerations for rehabilitation of the brachycephalic patient. Why don't we start with talking about why the brachycephalic dog might even be in rehabs? What are some of the conditions that these dogs have that we see them for?
And even before that, let's remind our audience that we are both certified canine rehabilitation practitioners. So we perform physical rehabilitation on small animals, and you do birds and other pocket pets and so forth as well. So this is why we are particularly interested in talking about the rehab considerations. Some things that we might be treating, one I think of, because all the breeds you mentioned, except maybe the boxer, are small dogs, right? And so when we breed them down, and we're kind of getting again into this thing where we're creating smaller and smaller. And so what that causes is kind of a change in their anatomy of their legs, and then they get dislocating or luxating patellas or kneecaps. And so we see a lot of these dogs maybe both conservatively and after surgery to stabilize their kneecap.
Right. And we did a great show with Dr. Karen Pastor on patella luxation. So if anybody's interested in learning more, you should go back and listen to that show.
And, these little dogs too, I mean, they easily get fractures when they're puppies. And, so there's all kinds of musculoskeletal things for which they may be in rehabilitation.
Avascular necrosis is something I see very common in these little dogs too. So the Pekingese, the pugs. So I see a lot of those dogs in therapy because of avascular necrosis or fracture related to avascular necrosis.
Right. Otherwise known as leg Perthes disease. And that's a hip condition. So there's one artery that goes up to the end of the ball in the socket of the hip joint. And that is very common in these small breeds.
Yeah.
But the thing I think of most, I guess, that is particularly correlated to brachycephalic breeds like pugs and Frenchies is spinal disease. So more neurological issues, right?
I see a lot of pugs and Frenchies, and actually young Frenchies with spinal disease. Hemivertebrae or half vertebrae is very common in these breeds.
Yeah, and the other thing in terms of spinal disease in these breeds is caudal articular process dysplasia. And I think both of these syndromes result in an arch or kyphotic spine.
And in these Frenchies, this posture leads to, thoracolumbar intervertebral disc disease.
And we see a lot of dogs with IVDD or disc issues, but there's a big prevalence in Frenchies, right? And as you mentioned, even very young dogs. Cathy, we've outlined several things for which we might see brachycephalic dogs. Final thing would be weight loss, because weight loss is imperative for maintaining patent breathing. I know this myself, being post-menopause. I have gained some weight, and that's when I started to need my CPAP machine, and my snoring went through the roof. So Baxter and I are now competing for, who's the loudest snorer. So, conditioning and appropriate weight. We also help with those types of things.
Yeah. And I think it's important to mention too that even just a little bit of weight on a small dog is a lot of weight.
Percentage wise,
it's a lot, a lot of weight to carry. And I think they're maybe there's a misconception that these dogs are sort of boxy and square, and so they should be sort of stout, but that's not true. They really do need to be lean, just like all of our other dogs. They need to be lean and not sort of barrel shaped. But that's a lot of weight. Even at 1 pound is a lot of weight for a little dog, and that can shorten a dog's lifespan. And we know from studies that dogs that have obesity will die 2 years earlier than dogs that are of the same breed or same condition that are trim. So it's a big factor. So weight loss is really important, and it shouldn't be overlooked in the field of rehabilitation. Like, I think these dogs are a really good candidate for weight loss programs.
Cathy, now that we've outlined, the various things, let's definitely get into the meat of considerations for rehabilitation of the brachycephalic patients. What do we need to do to make them successful?
Well, I think temperature regulation is probably really on the top of my list, keeping the environment cool and well ventilated for these dogs, because they are prone to overheating. And so I'll tell you a little story. Once we had a mishap once with when I worked at this other practice with our underwater treadmill. The water temperature to actually reach like 95 degrees overnight. And we didn't use it the next day until it cooled down. And you certainly couldn't use that with a brachycephalic dog. It's just too hot for them. So we really need to be aware of temperature regulation for these dogs.
And I think you raise a very good point. I think a lot of people have the misconception that if a dog or a person is in water, that it's cooling, right? That you can't overheat, but a person can actually sweat when they're swimming and doing laps. We don't perceive that because, we may be in a cool temperature. With our dogs, we often have the temperature of the therapy pool or underwater treadmill a tad warmer for the benefits of increased circulation and things like that. But there's a sweet spot, to your point. If it's too warm, no way. If it's too cool, then our muscles can get stiff and so forth. So we're trying to find that temperature therapeutically that's going to provide the most benefit and the least harm.
So we have to be aware of that for water temperature and for swimming. Brachycephalic dogs aren't really historically known for their great swimming ability, and swimming can be really taxing. It's actually, sure, you're not weight bearing, but it's resistant and it's a really tough exercise. It requires a lot of energy. And these dogs aren't typically known for their abilities to swim, especially since they're top heavy. So if you're going to do it, one, heads up pet's water collar for sure, because we don't want these dogs to aspirate. We don't want them to take in water and get aspiration pneumonia because their faces are short and flat. And you can use that in combination with the life vest. But water temperatures are a consideration, and making sure these dogs don't overexert themselves in the pool.
Yeah, in general, I think moderate controlled exercise for fitness and rehabilitation to minimize respiratory distress. And, a lot of times in rehab anyway, we're talking about doing shorter, more frequent walks versus a long, strenuous bout of exercise. That's certainly true during rehabilitation, but also their home programs and just general activity for health and wellness in the care of their pet parents.
And I think providing a calm environment for any patient is going to be helpful, right? So minimizing that stress,
Right. And I talked about, Julep getting triggered with excitement. And so many dogs are excited to come to rehab. They know they're getting cookies and they're getting all this attention, and they come running in, and that can definitely get.
Yeah. And then you had one patient that used to run in and jump right in the pool. Remember, I don't remember who that was, but they would run right down the stairs and into the pool. It makes me think of that dog, because it was so excited to be there.
Yes. I had one dog jump in the pool with its winter coat on. It went around the gates and jumped in our pool on the stairs. Yeah.
So they're excited because it's a fun environment. It's fun.
People have shared stories like they know, right? Our dogs know, because there are subtle cues that we're giving them unbeknownst to us that there's a difference between going to rehab and going to the vet or whatever. And they'll say, as soon as I turned the corner, 5 miles up the road, they knew where we were going, and the excitement begins, right?
Right.
So think about the temperature in your car. Think about how you can keep them calm as you're arriving to the facility, things like that, to partner with us in this endeavor to get the most out of their session. Because of the exertion, looking for particular signs, when they come back after, maybe swimming into the resistance jets, I would pick up their ear flap and see how red their ears are, how warm their ears are. What are they doing in terms of their breathing respiratory rate as well as the shape of their tongue. So there's a telltale sign called a spatula or spoon tongue. And I know you're very familiar with that, Cathy. So why don't you describe it?
Yeah. Well, it's just like what it sounds, Chris. These dogs are panting and their tongues come way out. And then it kind of takes on the shape of, what like a wooden spoon looks like? Kind of takes on the shape of a wooden spoon where it's kind of pooled in the center like that.
So I think it kind of goes from being like wide at the end when they're panting to that curled up. So that's very significant and easy to identify. So some other signs of heat stress to be aware of are, as mentioned, the excessive panting, drooling, lethargy, and then finally collapse. If you get to that collapse point, again, you're in trouble. Get to the ER ASAP. In terms of keeping dogs cool too, they're coming out with more and more products like the neck wraps, that we use as people, like you can hydrate them and put them in the freezer and then wrap them around your neck. They're having those types of things for dogs. And I've also learned that in the groin area of a dog is their femoral arteries. So again, getting coolness to, the inside of their thighs, their tummy, where their organs are. And of course, getting their feet cool because that's where they sweat. The only place that they sweat is their feet. And if you see dampness on the pavement or your floor, you know that they're sweating, and it could be from stress, but it could be that they're just hot. Yeah. So pay attention to that.
And you had talked about your dog's gum color, the color of your dog's gums previously, and how she loses perfusion to the gums and becomes sort of bluish and pale. On the other end of that, these dogs can become hyperperfused. So you will see these gums become bright red, and their mucous membranes will be dry, and their gums will be red. So we can check for those signs as well. Yeah, that's no good. Yeah, that's no good. And when they get to the hospital, if they've reached that stage, what we have to do is cool them down internally. So we'll insert a catheter rectally and introduce cool water because their internal temperature is just that high. That's where we have to start the cooling process from internally.
Yes. And again, if it's not that severe, I mean, what do you do immediately? You get them to a cooler area, get them inside, get them to the AC. Down. Yeah. And, we talked about, where to put cool water and that sort of things, but also offering them water, right? So that they can drink and cold water.
We don't want them gulping it either. So we're going to let them drink a little and take a little rest, drink a little. We don't want them to gulp that water because we don't want them to aspirate as well, because they're going to be drinking it really fast. So we can give them water, but we don't want them gulping copious amount.
Let's finally just repeat again some of the common respiratory distress symptoms. What are those?
I would say that noisy breathing sound is one of my first indications that there's a problem. That audible, noisy breathing, the one I did the demo for.
And my dogs gag a lot. I know I'm actually taking Julep to the cardiologist next week. And I know the last few times I've been there, I said, there's increased gagging. They always ask me about coffee because of their heart disease. But I've been saying, it's more like a gag.
The gag, the cough, the reluctance to exercise. So if it's too hot, like today, I took Mac out just briefly to go to the bathroom, and we walked in the shade. But as soon as we had to walk back to the building, he was like, he put on the brakes. And so listen to that. It may be too hot and they're telling you they can't do it. So when Mac went out today, he has a dog walker. They actually took him to Lowe's instead of going for a walk. And he had all of his accessories. He had his stroller, his portable fan, he had ice water, and
he's not spoiled at all.
and his cooling mat in the stroller. But these are some of the precautions that we have to take on a day like today. Yes. I mean, it was like 90 degrees. It's oppressive. That could kill a dog. That could very easily kill a dog.
And shame on me for saying, that he's spoiled, because
he is spoiled.
He is spoiled, and I know that. But these are the measures that you need to take when you have a brachycephalic dog.
Right. Because this weather can kill. It could kill any dog, but it could kill a brachycephalic dog very quickly.
So, we've talked about all these things. What can be done about it? There are some surgical interventions that Cathy alluded to. So they can go in, they can remove a wedge of the nares to open those up. They can shorten that elongated soft palate. They can remove the everted laryngeal saccules. So those are the surgical options. But there is an increased anesthetic risk with brachycephalic dogs. So you want to make sure that your veterinarian is comfortable, because there are many considerations, things to note and evaluate before anesthetizing. And so this isn't taken lightly and just, oh, let's get surgery and get it fixed, willy-nilly. I mean,
right. And
you're risk benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. And anybody who's working in the veterinary industry, your veterinarian, your technicians, anybody in the veterinary field is going to know that there's an increased anesthetic risk with these brachycephalic dogs. That doesn't mean that they're not candidates for surgery. It's just that, we have to be cautious when we're anesthetizing dogs who have short muscles and crowded mouths.
Well, what's really cool in my research, I found that they're starting to do the surgery with laser. So it's a CO2 laser done as an outpatient surgery. They actually have it here in the Boston area called Angel Animal Medical Center. And the benefits of that are that there's decreased bleeding, there's increased control and preciseness with using the laser, and it's minimally invasive, as I mentioned, outpatient. So it's a day surgery. There's no need for stitches or, the cone of shame.
I love the CO2 laser. I think that anytime we use it, and we use it at another practice I work with some of the smaller animals because it minimizes bleeding. It's really nice.
Besides the surgical options, I just want to go back again to breeding, and that the BOAS is in the top 5 of genetically inherited diseases in dogs. The breeders are particularly breeding for short muzzles and thick necks, which makes it even worse, makes them more predisposed to all the things that we're talking about, and not to diss, all breeders, because there's good ones out there. So as a consumer out there, support those breeders that are ethically doing the right thing.
Talked about this earlier, and I'm going to reiterate it. That doesn't mean that these dogs aren't adoptable, and that doesn't mean that these dogs shouldn't be rescued. And I know that they can be a little bit of a challenge living with a brachycephalic dog. I know because I do, but that doesn't make them not wonderful pets and wonderful animals. But the considerations for that, there are so many considerations, and you really have to educate yourself on the specifics of that type of owning this type of dog.
Well said. But on the opposite side of that, I think that every dog, if you think that you're, going to get this dog because they don't have problems, every breed has something genetically that they're predisposed to. But the love and joy and fulfillment that they provide to us, far outweighs that. You can't always predict, but as you said, do your research and education. And, ultimately, we're saying this because we want to improve the quality of lives of our pets, make them happier and healthier. And specifically with these brachycephalic dogs, in the long term, if they have surgery or better breeding methods to breed out some of these issues that are causing the problems, they're going to have increased heat tolerance, decreased respiratory infections, and reduced cardiac strain. So those are the long-term benefits. And finally, I just want to say, we've been talking dogs, but there are smoosh-faced cats too.
There are.
And what are some of those, Cathy?
You'll see the flat faces in your Himalayans, your Persians, and even in some of the Scottish folds, you'll see some of these cats with flatter faces. So yeah, it's not just dogs. We definitely have cats with those little flat faces, and they are susceptible to all the same things that our flat-faced dogs have.
Right. Well, gosh, I think we've covered it. Hey, Cathy, I just want to mention, we interviewed Ilaria Borghese about Vital Vet, and they just put up their new website, the new and improved, and our podcasts are part of the website. And for those of you who haven't gone to it, it's vitalvet.org, and it's basically one-stop shopping for everything rehab related. And there's a lot of information. Like I said, our rehab podcasts have been consistently in their top 10 as far as clicks since they launched the new website. So I'm very proud of that. And they are only including those related to rehabilitation, since that's the focus and mission of Vital Vet. But
we have other shows. I mean, you can just go to PetAbility Podcast. We're on Buzzsprout. We're on Spotify. We're on all of your streaming apps. So you should check that out as well. And just, as closing, I just want to say, to have PetAbility Podcast be affiliated in any way, shape, or form with Vital Vet and Ilaria is, it's amazing. I mean, they've been with us rehabbers since the very beginning. They have seen and graduated and helped and assisted all of our patients. If you're a rehabber, I'm sure that you've had some contact probably with Ilaria Borghese. So to say that I'm proud of that would probably be an understatement, because the trustworthiness of VitalVet, the integrity of VitalVet, and the knowledge alone makes me very proud to have any type of affiliation with them. So I'm really happy to see that they put our podcast on their website.
She's been a big fan, as Cathy said. We are mutually a fan of hers. So
yeah, she's been a big supporter of canine rehabilitation practitioners and veterinary clinics. She's been a very big supporter of us. So thank you, Ilaria. Go there. Even if you're an owner, you can visit there. It's one-stop shopping. You can check out all the stuff that they have there. My book is available on their website too, Blind Devotion, Enhancing the Lives of Blind and Visually Impaired Dogs. If you're a rehabber, check it out too, because this is your place for your shopping. This is your place for all your products and education. And go there now before you forget. Okay.
vitalvet.org. Okay. And check out all of our sponsors and links in the show notes as well. All right, kids, been great.
All right. I'll catch you on the other side there, Chris. Have a good day.
Cathy.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show.
Follow us on social media at PetAbility Podcast.
And please check out our affiliates and sponsors.
Simply go to the show notes for information and links.
Thank you, and tune in next time.